Hi, class. Welcome to, this is chapter 8. We're going to look at interpersonal communication. Okay. So we're going to look at key aspects of the communication process. The process of interpersonal communications. Interpersonal communication, what does that mean? It's a process where we communicate, we send a message, we receive a message, both verbal and nonverbal information. So it's any kind of communication that we have with a loved one or with our workmates, or we have interpersonal communication with the bank teller or anyone in the clerk at the grocery store. Interpersonal communication is a process in which we send a message to another person. Components of this communication process. We have the sender, which would be the person speaking, right? The person who is initiating the message. We have the receiver, the person who the message is directed at. We have the message itself, the information that's being transmitted. We have the channel, the sensory means that we're expressing that, where the message reaches the person. So we can have our ears, we also have our eyes with all of the nonverbal communication that we kind of take in. We also would have not just words, but if there's sound or other noises around, that would all be a part of that. Noise is any stimulus that interferes with accurately expressing that whatever this message is. And it also, noise would be anything that interferes with understanding the message. So if you're talking on the phone to, one of your workmates and it's an important situation that you're trying to deal with, but then your 2-year-old comes up and is like, hey, da, 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 that would be noise. The context is a component of communication process. So the environment where the communication takes place, is it in person, over the phone? Is it over FaceTime? Is it a boss, friends? What mood are we in? All of these things create the context, and that also determines partly how we can receive or deliver information. One thing to consider is that interpersonal communication is like a dance. One person talks, the other person listens, and then vice versa. We get more comfortable with people that we hang out with all the time, don't we? And that interpersonal communication becomes a little bit easier. It's always nerve-wracking, even if you go on a date for the first time, or if you're with a new group of people for the first time, it can be a little bit of anxiety promoting for some of us. And that's just learning that dance, learning how we kind of vibe together. Social media, we do need to be aware of our privacy on social media. It can affect interpersonal communications. If we put up things that are harsh or mean, we might be causing harm to some other people in a different circle. But also too, the book talks about how people have gotten fired from whatever's going on in their social media. So just be aware, put out there what you want others to know. Nonverbal communication, let's start there. So we're going to explain the significance of nonverbal communication for understanding and relating to others. So nonverbal communication it transmits meaning from one person to the other, from our body language, our attitudes, or other symbols, not just our words, but symbols, meaning, or even how we're, if somebody rolls their eyes and does a breath like we know clearly that they're not really interested in what we have to say, or that would be communicating like I'm impatient, I'm over this kind of a deal. Nonverbal behaviors include interpersonal distance, like how close or far we stand from the person. If we stand too far, it might suggest that we're not really interested. If we're kind of turned away from the person, it might also give the impression that we're not really interested. We're in a hurry, we gotta go. If our facial expressions, if we lean forward, that can be an indication that we're paying attention and we care. Eye contact can be a big deal. If we're kind of looking around the room and we're not making eye contact, that's a distraction. The person might feel unimportant or like they don't matter. Gestures, physical touch, tone of voice, all of those aspects are nonverbal behaviors that give us information about the conversation. Okay, general principles about nonverbal communication. I just abbreviated that because it was too long for the PowerPoint. So NVC means nonverbal communication. But nonverbal communication definitely conveys emotion. So you can tell when somebody is, if they're cross with you by the darting eyes, or you can tell if somebody is flirting with you without saying a word. They smile and they kind of have a flirting eyes kind of a thing. We can experience piercing glances, a smile, a gentle touch on the shoulder, like, hey, thanks so much. All of those things can contribute to the communication. And it really helps us to gauge the environment, or it gives us way more information about than just the words do. Okay, we receive messages through multiple channels simultaneously. So we communicate through gestures, facial expressions, eye contact, tone of voice, all at the same time. And our communication can be ambiguous. People interrupt, or a shrug or a raised eyebrow. All of those things can be interpreted differently. So there's not always, we have to be aware that not everybody is going to have the same meaning about a certain raised eyebrow or a certain, kind of eye roll or something like that. Sometimes when in that ambiguity, I'm sure this has happened to you multiple times, it's happened to all of us, but you kind of wonder if that message that the message you received from somebody's nonverbal communication, was that what they actually wanted to communicate? Are you reading it correctly, or are you reading it too much into it? And also we can consider just what our own, what our behavior is like. So have a little bit more self-awareness about when I'm talking to somebody, what's the nonverbal communication that I'm presenting with? Am I looking interested? Do I seem like I care? Am I meeting with eye contact? Am I smiling? Am I gesturing forward or leaning in a little bit? Something like that. Like, so I can just get more conscious of how I'm presenting. Okay. Sometimes nonverbal communication can contradict the message that we're saying verbally. Someone declares they're not angry, but then slams the door through the house. One thing I see a lot of times in therapy is somebody says, oh, it's just miserable, but they're smiling. So that's a contradiction. And we would want to look at that. So why are you smiling as you tell me how painful this situation was? Is there an incongruence? Is the person not allowed to feel sadness or allowed to feel betrayal or whatever it is that they're talking about? Are they not allowed to feel that? And I say allowed, meaning, it's just this unconscious rule that somebody has chosen to follow because of whatever reason. When someone's instructed to tell a lie, deception is most readily detected through nonverbal signs. So that's an interesting thing to consider, isn't it? It's not the words that's going to tell us, it's the nonverbal signs. Culture plays a part in nonverbal communication as well, because things can mean different things in different cultures. There's many signs that mean different things in different cultures, and some of them are, great for us, and they mean completely different things that are kind of offensive in other countries. In Tibet, people greet with their friends by sticking out their tongues. So that would be that's an interesting one, isn't it? That's not something we would do. So if somebody came up and said, like, hi, it might feel odd or strange to us. Okay. And we're going to look at Paul Ekman in just a minute, but he's one of the leading psychologists who's studied nonverbal communication. He's really studied facial expressions, but some nonverbal communication. So personal space is an important aspect of this. Different people have different ideas of what a comfortable space feels like. You can gauge when you're talking to somebody and you come up there and maybe you're enthusiastic and excited about something and they kind of back up. Well, we just violated their personal space element of nonverbal communication. So, we just notice, okay, cool, no big deal. And then you just respect that space boundary. But the more we like a person, the more comfortable we usually are with allowing them to kind of get closer or be in our most inner circle. Facial expressions convey emotion. Again, we're going to look at a video about Paul Ekman, but he studies emotion through facial expressions. And he teaches that these primary emotions, anger, disgust, fear, happiness, sadness, and surprise, look the same in every culture, at every age around the world. So it's something that we can detect and then know kind of the context of what's happening. And he works a lot with law enforcement. He does a lot of forensic things. So he teaches people to look for lying and through the facial expressions. And again, I'll show you that in just a few minutes. Eye contact. So this is also called mutual gaze. So during a conversation, it can be really, we communicate the message that somebody is not important if we don't make enough eye contact. If we make too much eye contact, it can communicate the message that, somebody's like feeling that's pretty intense, like, whoa, chill out, like you're kind of over the top here. It also could be intimidating. It could be a little creepy. So that duration of eye contact is important to just notice. I think, one of the things that we look at when we have any of this psychology stuff, we always want to look at if it happens consistently. If we consistently get feedback like, hey, chill out, stop staring at me, then it's something that we could probably look at. If it's not something that we consistently get feedback on, or we could ask a trusted friend or a family member if they feel like we have a tendency to do something in an odd way, but we can ask for feedback. And if it's not consistent that we're not doing it in a funky way, then it's probably not something we need to look at. If we get consistent feedback that we have a tendency to stare and it feels intense for others, then it's something to look at. Then we could probably look at that, change it, and help other people to feel more comfortable when we're in conversation. But eye contact also can communicate openness, a sense of being engaged, credibility and competence. It also can communicate a sense of confidence or self-esteem. I believe that I am of value, so I am willing to look you in the eye because I know that I'm worthy of your attention, and you are also worthy of my attention, kind of a thing. Okay, body language plays a huge part in there's also this thing called nonviolent communication, and they use the acronym NVC. So that's what I was just saying. So anyway, elements of nonverbal communication. I'm stuck on nonviolent communications. Elements of nonverbal communication. Body language. Kinesthetics is the study of communication through body movements. And this is when we notice things like leaning towards is usually an indication of interest and a positive attitude, or we're curious. A body angled away from the person could indicate that we're not interested. Crossed arms, even crossed legs, can indicate a defensive stance or a negative attitude, or maybe just disinterested. Now, crossed legs is something that for instance, I do crossed legs a lot of the time in therapy just because I sit like that. And I think about it often, and then I'll try to uncross my legs for a period of time. But I don't feel like it affects my therapy. But again, that's something I pay attention to. I ask people just how they feel, and I've never had anybody tell me that it does. But of course, if it's a new, we also have a relationship. But if it's a job interview or something where you're meeting somebody for the very first time and it's very short, it may be something to consider not crossing your legs. But crossing your legs is certainly different than doing, crossing your arms kind of a thing where you're just definitely closed off. Touch, depending on the context and the type of touch, can be very encouraging. It can show support. It can show enthusiasm. It can also, of course, show sexual intimacy or the desire for sexual intimacy. But even if if a friend is struggling and having a hard day, even just a gentle, just a simple, hey, I'm thinking about you kind of thing as you walk by, that can be a very encouraging kind of touch. Okay, detecting deception. People typically tell 1 to 2 lies per day. What do you think? Do you do that? Pay attention this week. Think about it. So next week, when we have the lecture, I'll ask if you paid attention to how often you tell a lie. Again, just self-awareness. Why do I need to lie? Am I trying to be cool? Am I trying to seem, what do I need? Why do I need to be different than I am? Or maybe it's about, a circumstance or something like that. Anyway, pay attention to that. Deception is used to get what we want or to present a better, cooler, or more accomplished persona to the world. So that's what we want to uncover. If we do lie 2 times a day, I mean, the average person does, but so whatever it works out to be for you, what's the reason? What's fueling that? When we understand what's fueling it, then we can change it. Then we can change the thinking pattern, because we're not just changing, oh, I don't want to lie, so through willpower, I'm not going to lie. Because if I have this really strong pull towards, I just feel like I'm complete jerk, and I just feel like I feel like I'm dumb, and I don't feel adequate. So I have this strong desire to present a better, cooler, more accomplished version of who I am. So if I don't understand that, I'm going to be propelled to lie, and the willpower isn't going to work, because I'm going to try and try and try. But then my need to present that cooler persona is always going to take precedent. Okay. So lie detection, polygraph. There's considerable skepticism on the effectiveness of a polygraph. They are not permissible as evidence in a court of law. Polygraphs measure our emotion linked. So a polygraph is measuring the changes that happen in our breathing, our heart rate, and our perspiration. So what they do is they kind of take a baseline. So they connect you to the machine, and then they ask you questions like, do you live at blah, blah, blah? Yes. Do you, are you married? Whatever. So, and then you answer these questions that are super easy, right? That everybody knows the answers to. And then you just, that's how they gauge your baseline. And then they start asking questions where if you're lying, the idea is that your breathing, heart rate, and perspiration would elevate. The problem is that we have similar body arousals in response to anxiety, irritation, and guilt. So a lot of people, totally innocent people, might get tense or anxious just because they're being accused of something bad, right? They're being put on a polygraph. So they already might have an upregulated response. Also, many people do get tense just knowing they're being tested. There are people who can, kind of fool the lie detector test, or And one of the ways that they do that is they put something like a tack or something that's causes pain in their shoe. And then when they're asking those baseline questions, they would press their toe into that tack, so it's poking them, and that would give them stress. That would upregulate their heart rate. That would upregulate the perspiration and the breathing because of the pain. And then when they got to the difficult questions, the idea is that their baseline would be elevated, so they would not detect a difference. Yeah, anyway, it's interesting. There's lots of research out there on lie detection, but generally speaking, there's considerable skepticism on the evidence of the effectiveness. Okay, but now switching gears, let's look at Paul Ekman. So I want to show you, have any of you ever seen the show Lie to Me? It was a TV series. I think they stopped it, but it's based on the research of Paul Ekman. He spent about 50 years researching and kind of categorizing facial expressions and body movements. So the past 30 years, his research has focused on detecting when a person is lying by observing these tiny little fleeting, he calls them micro expressions, but they're little tiny fleeting facial expressions so you go back to those 5 or 6 primary emotions that he talks about. So he says scorn is the same for every single person, and he shows this concealed scorn, and the people make this scorn face. So micro expressions last for a really short period of time. If you weren't looking for it, you wouldn't see it. So you have to really be trained to see it, to pay attention to it. But it might be a shift of the eye, a curl of the upper lip, that sneer might come up, and you'll see it in this video. But those can give us away. Those tell us that we're lying, or tell somebody who's trained that we're lying. And they're involuntary, so we don't control them. They come from our unconscious. So let me show you. This is a 4-minute video. This is like from the first episode. That is the Lie to Me series. And again, it's based on Paul Ekman's work. And he has spent much of his career working in forensics, detecting lies, detecting when people lie. Okay. It's kind of interesting. I think it's fascinating, actually. So if anybody's, well, we don't do a paper in this class. In the 101 class, we do a paper. I was going to say you could do that for your paper, but you don't have to do a paper. Good for you. You have to do the reflection papers. They're different. Okay, so now that is kind of detecting lies. But the micro expression detecting lies is it seems to be more effective than the polygraph. So let's look at communicating more effectively. We're going to look at communicator, or learn to be an effective communicator when it comes to conversation disclosure and listening. Okay, so conversation skills. If you want attention and respect when you express your feelings and thoughts, then give that to others, right? It's what we give, we get. What we give, we get back. Focus on the other person. Listen to understand, not to respond. That's an important one. Remember that whole idea, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So listen twice as much as you talk. When somebody's talking to you, don't think about, oh, I got to tell this, oh, I got to tell that, or do your best not to. And when you do think those thoughts, just come back to the present moment, come back to their conversation, and just try to get curious about really understanding what's going on for them. Use nonverbal cues to communicate your interest in the other person. So you might lean forward, you might raise your eyebrows, you might smile, you might say, tell me more. Wow, that's really cool. What did that feel like? Things like that. Okay, so how to have successful small talk. The book is using small talk as kind of like a foot in the door kind of thing that would build toward deeper conversations and more meaningful relationships. But we definitely have, we have a need for small talk all the time, at work, at like networking functions, and at school, all over the place, even while you're in line at the grocery store or something. Sometimes we have small talk with the person we're standing next to. But so indicate you're open to a conversation by commenting on like the surroundings or something of mutual experience. Like, so if you're, I don't know, if you're on the bus, say, and you're somebody's sitting near you, and you could say, oh, you know what, and you drive by some restaurant that you like, and you could say, oh yeah, you know, we ate there a couple weeks ago, it was really great, have you ever been there? Something like that. Just indicate that you're open to conversation. Introduce yourself, and confidence is important. So extend your hand and look the person in the eye and say something like, hey, hi, I'm Dr. Rinaldi, nice to meet you. I'm taking the psychology class, what brings you here? Something like that, right? But just it's important to have a solid sense about who we are. Like, if we make solid eye contact, that says a lot about our self-esteem and about the confidence that we have. If we have kind of like a firm handshake, that also says the same. It doesn't mean we have to be all like rough, but just a firm handshake, like we're definitely here to shake your hand, I'm not timid, I'm not afraid, those kind of things. Okay. Number 3, keep an eye out for common ground or similarities, and select a topic that others can relate to. So you might comment on their tattoo if you think it's cool, and then mention a tattoo that you have on your back or something like that, or, you know, something, maybe a friend of yours has a tattoo that you really admire. But trying to find similarities helps us build that sense of familiarity. And once we have that sense of familiarity, then it's easier to make conversation. You can also use sports. That can be a good one. Teams. But there's lots of working out, hiking, any kind of thing that we do a lot, painting or something like that. You can ask people about being creative. And of course, it depends on where you are too. I mean, if you're at a meditation meeting or a meditation class, you could talk about meditation. How long have you been meditating? Oh, that's cool. How'd you get into it? Kind of stuff like that. Number 4, you can keep the conversation rolling by introducing a related topic or asking questions about the person that you have a general interest in. So if you're at the meditation class, you might ask, so do you ever do yoga too, or are you just into meditation? Or you might ask, you know, what like something else, do you go to school, or where do you work? Just interesting facts like that. And when you're ready to leave, you know, politely excuse yourself. I know sometimes it can be easy to feel caught or trapped in a conversation. But it's, you know, it's important to try to be true. When we need to go, we need to go. So kindly but assertively, we might thank them for that nice conversation, and, oh, hey, I'll see you around soon. And next time you see them, you might make, you know, like make a point to smile and wave at them, indicate that you remember the conversation and enjoyed it. A lot of people often, we probably all do it, but we assume that somebody doesn't remember what we talked about, or we're not, you know, like the conversation wasn't that important. So if you do remember and it was meaningful, just make a point to help them see that, you know what, hey, that was a cool conversation, I really enjoyed the time we spent before class the other day, or whatever it was. Notice your self-talk. So are you thinking about all the details of what you said? And if you sounded silly or foolish, or, you know, if you stumbled over your words or something like that, are you telling yourself they probably didn't enjoy the conversation as much as you? And when you notice that self-talk, do your best to stop it and reframe it. And the reframe might look something like, you know, if you're telling yourself that you thought you were foolish or silly, the reframe of that thought would be, it seems like they enjoyed our conversation as much as I did. I think they enjoyed it. Something like that. So it doesn't have to, you don't have to go totally, like, it has to still be believable, but at the same time, it has to be more realistic. It seemed like they enjoyed the conversation. They were still, they didn't leave the conversation. They were engaged. They asked me questions. So it seemed like it. So I'm going to reframe it so that I feel a little bit more balanced. Okay. So practicing our communication skills, you can do the small talk stuff when you're standing in line at the grocery store, or if you're, I don't know, at school and you're walking through campus, and there's always people that we don't know, right? So you could just say hi to somebody who is sitting near you or something like that. And it's okay to be nervous and push through that. Like, social anxiety happens to some of us, and part of it is just pushing through it. And part of it, social anxiety can be a bigger thing than just something we push through. But a lot of the times it's just we're imagining that we're going to have a negative appraisal from some people. And so we get fearful to reach out. So we want to push through that, to recognize that, wait, when I do reach out, it does work out. I do have successful outcomes, kind of a thing. Self-disclosure. Self-disclosure is important. When we go from small talk, that's how we start a relationship, right? We kind of have superficial conversation, but it's still important, but it's just about kind of superficial things. And then we start looking at the more deep and meaningful our friendships become, the more self-disclosure we have or we use. So self-disclosure would be, as a relationship progresses, it's appropriate vulnerability. And that vulnerability becomes essential. Like, if we don't express vulnerable things, our relationship doesn't tend to grow deeply. It doesn't mean, a lot of people struggle with self-disclosure, but they just don't have a great degree of depth in their intimacy. So self-disclosure would be sharing personal information about how you feel about yourself, about another person, about an experience. It's really giving somebody it's giving somebody the view to see our own humanity. So when you self-disclose, they get to see your humanity. When I self-disclose, you get to see my humanity. So each relationship is going to have a different level of appropriate self-disclosure. Again, the closer our friendships, the more self-disclosure the more self-disclosure would be appropriate. The work relationships, we might have some self-disclosure some of the time, but it might be rare. That depends on the kind of work you do. So we would also call self-disclosure vulnerability. And vulnerability fuels connection. And it's very important to finding meaning. It's very important to finding fulfillment out of our relationships. If we don't make ourselves vulnerable, we can be married for 20 years and still feel lonely, because it's the vulnerability that brings closeness. That's what true intimacy is. True intimacy has nothing to do with sex. It has to do with open and honest communication. So vulnerability makes that open and honest communication deep. It makes it meaningful. If you're interested in learning more about vulnerability, Brene Brown has an awesome TED Talk. It's called The Power of Vulnerability. I think it's like 17 or 18 minutes. I would have showed it, but it's a little too long. So that could be a great resource. And looking at vulnerability can really change your life and your relationship. So it's a really important thing to consider. Many people view vulnerability as weakness and have a hard time admitting when they're hurt or when they need help. And this would be something that's really important to look at in yourself. If you have a hard time with that, consider practicing being vulnerable to people who are appropriate. Like, so if you have a close friend that you could practice with, if you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a husband or a wife, and you could practice with them, that could be useful. But we just want to ask for help when we need help, or ask for support when we need support. We also might just want to say, hey, I was feeling like X, Y, and Z today. I just wanted to express that. Or even asking, hey, do you have 10 minutes to sit with me? I just want to have a cup of coffee and kind of talk about my day. I feel like I need to vent a little bit. Something like that. If we can't ask for help when we need help, what is usually happening is when we help others, we actually feel superior. Because if we can't ask for help, that means we're like above needing help, right? We're above that. So when we offer help to others, we elevate ourselves. So it gives us a false sense of self. It elevates our sense of self. It props up our sense of self. So that because we're doing it at the expense of somebody else. Whereas true self-esteem would be an equal playing field. And compassion is always a relationship between equals. So when I'm reaching out to somebody from a compassionate heart, I'm not elevated. I'm not superior in any way. I'm not looking at that poor unfortunate being below me. I'm simply saying, wow, life is tough right now. I can see that clearly. It's been really tough for me in seasons of my life too. Let me walk with you for a little bit. That would be compassionate interchange. There's no superiority in that. And when we have those relationships between equals, that's where we have tremendous meaning because we see what really is. Okay. Listening is a huge part of interpersonal communication. Huge, 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 huge. And most people are not very good at listening. You may have friends that you've, have relationships with that every time you sit with them, it's like, no, nonstop about them. And then you'll chime in and say a few sentences and then it's back to them. Effective listening can really change the dynamic of our relationships because people feel valued, they feel validated, they feel cared about, they feel heard. And all of those things are tremendous in building meaningful relationships. Okay, so how do we listen effectively? We show interest through those nonverbal cues, which we've talked about already. So leaning in, like, wow, cool, facial expressions, head nods, whatever it is. We hear before responding. And we also hear in a way that we're hearing to understand. We're not hearing to respond. That's a key aspect. I don't understand. Can you help me understand that a little bit more? Tell me more about that. It doesn't quite make sense to me. Like, we really want to understand the person. Engage in active listening. I'm going to show you a short video on what that means, but active listening is a very helpful tool to remind us to ask questions and to engage and to really be curious. Active listening, the primary mode of active listening is be curious and validate. Pay attention to the person's nonverbal cues, because that's part of it too, right? So if the person is talking, but they're like and rolling their eyes, you can ask about it, like check in. Hey, what's going on for you? You seem kind of frustrated or annoyed. That's part of it too. When we are the speaker, it's important to be mindful of the listener's body language. So if they act disinterested, what does that mean? If we consistently get the signal that our listener is drifting or not paying attention, then it might be us that needs to check ourselves. We might be going overboard on irrelevant details, or you might be hogging the conversation. We can go overboard easily on irrelevant details sometimes when we tell stories about like the movie we saw or the book we read. We go into like a 10-minute thing when we could just say a few sentences about it. That helps the listener stay engaged. Good listening requires empathy. So practice empathy. Empathy is one of the superpowers of humanity. And so many people view empathy as weakness. And it's so opposite of that. Empathy is like it's almost like a crystal ball. When we have high empathy, we have the ability to see what people need. And not only is that loving and kind and useful, It's also very powerful because we can see when somebody needs a supportive hand or a kind word or just a minute to have a conversation. We can see when somebody is experiencing joy and we can share in that joy. So all of those things stem from empathy. So practicing our empathy can be really important. And we practice empathy by just being mindful of when we're checking out of a conversation. Notice when we're getting judgmental, when we feel like, oh, well, they shouldn't be doing that because of X, Y, and Z. That would be judgmental, right? So what do my judgments stop me from seeing? A lot of what we looked at in the last chapter when we practice those things, that self-awareness, that's what grows our empathy. Okay, this is a just under 2-minute video on active listening. So let me show you this.
Not having a good day, huh?
Yeah. You know that licensing deal I've been working with, that San Diego company? I was super gung-ho about it, thought it was going to be a good opportunity, but now I'm just not so sure.
So you were feeling really excited about it, and now you're having second thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you know I've done tons of these deals, and sometimes it takes a week, maybe a couple weeks, a month at the most, but this is just ridiculous.
So you're not used to having negotiations drag on like this?
Yeah. You know, we were pretty close to signing a deal a couple times, and then they'd ask for another concession, and then we met them more than halfway. But then I get an email this morning, and they want to push back the signing until, I don't know, the end of the year?
Well,
Kidding me?
Yeah, it sounds like you've given them as much as you can, and now this is just too much to ask.
Yeah. You know, I got a friend who works in the area too, and he said he's surprised that it's taken this long. Plus, he said there's other companies who'd be interested in our product, so.
So you got another perspective.
Yeah. I think I've just been, like, too focused in on trying to make this happen, and that I just lost sight of the big picture. So, what I need to do is just develop more leads in the area.
Well, it sounds like you're feeling ready to move on.
Yeah, I think I am. Hey, thanks for the help.
You're welcome. And keep me posted, okay?
Yeah, will do.
Okay, so that is an example of active listening. We get better at active listening by practicing. So there's lots of videos on YouTube you could look up to practice, but it's really a useful skill. You will use it for your entire life if you just even spend, a couple hours over the next week or two, kind of checking it out. And then practicing when you're with your friends, try to do that, rephrasing. It sounds like, because we're really validating that other person's experience, and that validation is what makes us feel seen, and that's what we miss so often. Loneliness is oftentimes fueled by that not having that validation. Nobody actually sees me, so oftentimes one might feel lonely because of that, even though they may have many people around them. Okay, communication problems. So recognizing the basic barriers that can undermine effective communication. So communication apprehension, in the DSM-5, the diagnosis would be social anxiety, but the book is calling it communication apprehension. I mean, there's always, if somebody could have apprehension towards a social situation and not be diagnosed because they don't meet criteria. So apprehension can just be a lesser version of social anxiety, but it's anxiety caused with it's anxiety caused by fear of talking to others. What's going to happen when we're one-on-one or in a group? There are physiological effects. So the idea is, when I feel apprehension, I might be thinking, what if this? What if that? What if I spill something on my shirt? What if I say something that makes me look stupid, whatever. So I'm thinking about all these things in the future that is causing me to be anxious. 4 responses to communication apprehension would be avoidance. So when we feel that apprehension or that anxiety, we may avoid, choosing not to participate. Avoidance would be a maladaptive strategy, because while we avoid getting anxious because we don't have to go into the social situation, we're not doing anything to solve the problem. So as soon as we go into a social situation again, it's going to be there front and center. So that would be called maladaptive. Withdraw, it would be when someone unexpectedly finds themselves in a communication situation where they feel trapped. So they might clam up or say as little as possible. Withdraw, the anxiety would be kind of taking over us in the moment. One of the things that we could do when we feel that sense is you could do some breathing things. I always teach with my clients, I do the breathe in for 4, hold for 4, and then out for 6. So you would go, so you could do that, without making noise with your breath. You could do it like more mellowly so nobody knows you're doing it, but that would be something you could do to kind of get that anxiety to ease it a bit. One of the reasons why anxiety happens, whether it's social anxiety or generalized anxiety, but anxiety happens because we're thinking about either the future or the past. Anxiety doesn't live in the present moment. So when we experience those withdrawal symptoms, particularly, we can use our present moment awareness to bring us back to right now. So we stop thinking about the overwhelmed feelings we have by being with all these people. So you also could use your senses. So if you're at a party or something like that and you're feeling overwhelmed, you could take a sip of your drink and you could feel whatever it is that you're drinking, whether it's water or a cocktail or a glass of wine or coffee or whatever it is, but you can feel it go down your throat and notice the detail. If it's a cold drink, notice the cold as it goes down your throat. If it's a hot drink, notice that coffee as the taste and how it feels when it goes down your throat, because it's the details that bring us to the present moment. And that's what will diminish that anxiety. So if you can do that in the moment, that can be helpful. Disrupted by one's own thinking process while speaking or communicating. And then over communication, when somebody feels that social anxiety, that some people can become nervous and talk too much. So we can just notice when we feel upregulated, and that's just all of these are just self-awareness things, like, okay, am I feeling nervous, and am I trying to fill in the gaps with talking because I get scared when it's silent? And if that's the case, if we get nervous when it's silent, just let the silence be there for a little bit longer. So say, okay, I'm going to count to 5 before I talk. And then there's quiet and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but you do it silently, of course. And then you say something again, and then you might count to 7 or something like that. But you just keep trying to get comfortable with that silence. Or practicing, I should say. Okay, barriers to effective communication. Defensiveness, an excessive concern with protecting ourselves from looking wrong or being hurt. So we do this when we feel threatened for whatever reason. And when we are defensive, we push away the conversation, communication, vulnerability. We push away, like if somebody says, I don't know, hey, last week in our session, you said X, Y, and Z, and it really hurt my feelings. So if I get defensive and say, oh, well, you just missed the point. What I was trying to say was, if you do this and this, it's going to help you with your social anxiety. That would be a defensive response. And that's going to push away vulnerability and communication. Whereas if I just said something like, wow, I'm really sorry. I didn't intend to make you feel that way. What was it like when I said that for you? What was it like? How did it feel for you? That's not a defensive response. That's like saying, okay, I'm not perfect and I didn't mean to do that. Help me understand more so I don't do it again. Ambushing can be a barrier to effective communication. So when someone is looking for the opportunity to attack a speaker or pop holes in their theory. So we see this a lot in academia, or when students are giving presentations. A lot of times it's the peer group that says, hey, what about this or what about that? They can be a tough audience. But so any kind of speaking gig, we're going to see a lot of people who can be strongly critical toward the speaker. That would be ambushing. There's nothing wrong with being critical. In fact, being critical is welcomed. But ambushing is when we're looking for every single opportunity to say, but what about that? What about that? What about that? So there's a difference. Okay, self-preoccupation. This is when someone's pretending to listen to you. They're pretending to be interested, but all they really want to do is have an opportunity to tell their story. So they might ask you about your new car, but all they want to really do is talk to you about their new car, something like that. Or oftentimes they might, if you're telling about, oh my gosh, I got a flat tire yesterday and it was so awful and and you're kind of telling this joking, silly story, and then they might interrupt you and say, oh my gosh, that was nothing. Listen to me. This is what happened to me. And it's kind of that one-upmanship attitude. Most of the time, self-preoccupation, when somebody's stuck in that cycle or that negative feedback loop, they're usually oblivious to the negative impact that it has on other people. They don't recognize that they're like, people leave the conversation and feel kind of taxed or tired, exhausted. Okay, interpersonal conflict. So let's look at ways to constructively recognize and deal with conflict. So of course, conflict happens when two or more people disagree, right? Ways of managing it: avoiding and withdrawing. But again, that goes back to maladaptive. So avoiding and withdrawing would have a low concern for the self and others. It's usually people are uncomfortable with a disagreement. And often they're thinking, if I ignore this, it's just going to go away. So then it's going to be better. It's just going to reset. If I just ignore it, it'll reset by next week. And again, that would be considered maladaptive because we're just masking the problem. We're just letting it kind of dissolve, but it's going to show itself in many other situations because we haven't learned to confront or deal with conflict when we are engaging in avoidance or withdrawal. Accommodating is low concern for self and high concern for others. And that would mean that when we're uncomfortable with conflict, it becomes more important to keep the peace. So we're going to do anything we can to make sure Sally's happy. So even though you have 3 papers due next week, Sally wants to go to dinner on Friday night, so you're going to go. That's an accommodating thing. You know that you should really stay home and work on those papers. So again, low concern for self, high concern for others. This would also be maladaptive because over time, it's not a big deal if we do it once or twice, but if this is our consistent strategy for dealing with conflict, we're going to set life up to be at our expense. And we're going to set it up so that we don't get our needs met, that we're always giving, and we're not getting our needs met. Another strategy is competing or forcing. This would be a high concern for self and a low concern for others. Also, this is a maladaptive. This is a more aggressive form, like the opposite side of the same coin of a maladaptive strategy. So very rigid thinking, black and white, win or lose. They'll do anything to emerge the winner. The person might be very like rigid and steadfast in their view. It's my way or the highway. There's no gray area. There's no common ground. You either do it 100% my way or I'm not doing it at all. This would be competing or forcing. So you can see how this kind of person might get in relationship with somebody who accommodates, because the forcing person needs to always have their way and the accommodating person wants to give into somebody's way. So it becomes a mutually beneficial, maladaptive interchange, if that makes any sense. Okay, compromising. This would be moderate concern for the self and others. And the compromising person would acknowledge the differing needs between the two people or the group, and be willing to negotiate to find a resolution. So each person would be giving something up to find a solution that works good enough in the middle or well enough for both of us, kind of a thing. Now, collaborating, this would be high concern for self and high concern for others. So this would be the most adaptive behavioral consideration. And collaborating would be, it's compromising, but it's even more than that. It's actually working to find a solution that is awesome for both people. When we compromise, we're kind of like splitting the difference. We're saying, okay, you give up this, you give up that, we're going to meet in the middle. Is that good enough? Okay, that's good enough. But collaborating is like, okay, you have this need, I have this need. What can we do together to make this even, like, what other solution is there? What cool solution can we come up with where we both feel pretty jazzed about it? So it encourages open and honest communication, which is the building blocks, the foundation for meaningful relationships. And it also develops creative thinking. When we're collaborating, we're thinking creatively, we're getting out of the box. And it also builds trust, because each person sees that the other person is really trying their best to make the other person's life, like to meet the needs of the other person. Like both people are working hard at that. Not one person is giving more than the other. So that develops trust. Okay. So ways to deal constructively with conflict. Make communication open and honest. So don't withhold information or misrepresent your position. I see this a lot of times with work stuff when I work with people in corporations. Sometimes there'll be a team member that doesn't give all of the information to a new team member. And it's like they set that person up for failure because they want to look like the champion. So that's not a constructive way to deal with conflict. That's going to create discord. So seek to communicate in a way that you would want others to communicate with you. If you don't want others to withhold information from you, don't withhold information from others. We want to think of it as, if my team succeeds, I succeed. And if I succeed, my team succeeds. Talk about specific behaviors, not personality. So we don't want to say things like, you always do this. We want to say things like, hey, yesterday afternoon, when you were late, I felt disrespected. You can see how you always are late is like a blanket statement. I'm globalizing their behavior. I'm making them bad because they're always late. Where when I just say, hey, yesterday afternoon, it was this one-time thing, I'm talking about a specific, concrete and specific time and behavior. I felt disrespected. Ways also to consider this when we're constructively trying to deal with conflict. Watch your judgments. Pay attention to those automatic thought processes. Oftentimes we'll automatically assume that people who disagree with us are ignorant or mean, or they're stupid, or whatever it is. Pay attention to that, because that's where that curious perspective comes in, where we would say, you know what, I've never thought of it in that way. Can you help me understand that? It doesn't mean you're going to change your mind or your opinion, but it just allows a relationship. You can always ask yourself, if you're feeling kind of combative toward a person, like if they're, you just feel like you're right and you need to make them understand that you're right. You can always ask yourself, what's more important? Is it more important to be right or to be close? Because sometimes we can't have both. We don't always need to be right. Closeness can what we gain from being close can far outweigh what we gain from being right. Being right is like such a short-lived, oh great, cool, I'm right. But being close is a meaningful thing where we sit and we feel love and care and concern for our well-being. All right. Show respect for the other person's perspective, just the same as you would want them to respect you. That's important. And then also consider your tolerance. How tolerant are you of views outside of your worldview? So do you get threatened by difference, or can you sit with it? Tolerance allows us to find room for everyone. There's a space for everyone. It doesn't mean you need to change your views, again, like we've talked about, but just allowing space for them can dissipate conflict. I don't need you to think exactly like me for us to coexist. I can think very different than you, as long as we respect each other in the process. And we're also not taking it personal when somebody doesn't agree with us. It's not personal. They get to choose their life just like you get to choose yours. So not taking it personal when people don't agree with us. Okay. Continuing on with constructive ways to deal with conflict. Avoid loaded words or name calling. Name calling is always dirty fighting. Loaded words can be problematic because loaded words will elicit a defensive response. And once somebody gets defensive, we're not going to have a meaningful, helpful conversation. So do your best to present your arguments like assertive and kind. It doesn't mean assertive, like it's interesting, because compassion doesn't mean anything like I just am a pushover or I allow people to take advantage of me. Compassion is very strong and mighty in so many ways. So when I have a compassionate response to something I don't agree with, it doesn't mean I'm allowing them to roll over on me. I'm simply saying, thanks so much for helping me understand your perspective. That doesn't work for me. Thanks so much. And then I leave. But that's a compassionate way where I'm not condemning them or telling them they're wrong, or, I'm not using loaded words or calling names. I'm simply saying, no. So that's something to consider. Use a positive approach to help other people not get defensive. And that goes along with what we were just saying. So we don't want to say, like, it would elicit a defensive response to say something like, you never help me cook dinners. A more effective way of saying that would be, hey, I love it when we cook dinner together. Do you think we could find time to do that on Friday night? So I'm expressing my need. I love it when we cook dinner together. And I'm also asking for help to meet that need. I'm saying, and I'm taking responsibility that I want to do that Friday night. So I'm giving that, I'm saying, hey, do you want to do that? And then my person gets the opportunity to either walk toward me or not. That would be we would call that a bid for affection. If we were in, if I'm speaking with my partner or my husband, and I say this to my husband, then I expressed a bid for affection, and then he has the opportunity to either step toward me or not. Okay, continuing on with constructive ways to deal with conflict. Taking responsibility for our own feelings and preferences. That's hugely important. So instead of saying how the other person is wrong, talk about how you feel. So I feel angry because of our conversation last night, rather than you make me mad when you say things like you said last night. Do you see the difference? If I said to you, you make me mad when, you're going to be like rolling your eyes already. When I say, hey, I feel angry because of our conversation last night, I'm taking responsibility for how I feel. I'm not saying you did anything wrong. I'm saying the conversation was challenging for me. Now we can dive into whether or not you communicated effectively and whether or not I communicated effectively. But I'm making it more probable that you will be able to listen to me when I take responsibility for my feeling rather than blaming you. Okay, use assertive communication style. So clear and direct communication would be assertive. Not being wishy-washy. Like if we don't want to go to the party on Friday night, saying, no, I don't want to go, or no, that doesn't work for me, or, you know, I can't do Friday night, but I would be up for going to lunch on Wednesday. How does that sound? You know, that's assertive. Non-assertive would be something like, well, let me see, I have a lot going on, I'm not sure. Why don't I touch base with you Thursday? That's wishy-washy, right? And what that does is it causes us stress because we know we got to deal with it on Thursday. We got to talk to them on Thursday. And it also makes it so that person might not, you know, they might be able to find somebody else to go with them if you tell them now. If you wait till Thursday, they're going to have 24 hours to find somebody new to take. So with assertive communication, it's our job to take responsibility for getting our own needs met. And that happens through assertive communication. So it even when I declare that I have to stay home and I can't go out on Friday, that is me taking care of my needs. You know, I've been going out a little bit too much and I have a lot of work to catch up on and I just need a little downtime. That's clear. I don't want my communication to be ambiguous. All right. So assertiveness can be hard for many people. I work with a lot of people on assertiveness in therapy. But assertiveness, the definition of that would be acting in one's own best interest by expressing one's thoughts and feelings directly and honestly. So I'm not sugarcoating it. I'm not wishy-washy. It doesn't mean I'm mean, but I'm clear and direct. So these are the questions from your book. But I thought it was important to just use this, maybe just use it as a self-reflection. When somebody asks you for an unreasonable favor, is it difficult to say no? Do you feel timid about returning flawed merchandise? Do you have a hard time requesting even small favors from others? When a salesperson pressures you to buy something you don't want, is it hard for you to resist? So if you're answering yes to most of those questions, you may need to increase your assertiveness. Self-esteem is the antidote to a lack of assertiveness. When we believe that we are worthy of our needs and our desires, our wants, whatever it is, when we feel worthy of those, then we protect them, especially our needs. When we feel worthy of having needs like I need to take care of myself as far as getting enough sleep, exercising, and making sure I have time to spend alone. My battery gets fueled when I'm home, when I have time. Doing my self-care is solo stuff. So when I do that, when I make sure that I have time for that, then I have more resources to use toward being assertive, to being patient, to being tolerant, all of those things. So self-care is a very important part of the puzzle. And that also helps us build a stronger self-esteem. But self-esteem is developed through making decisions. So anytime we make decisions, we're building self-esteem. So even just saying, you know what, let me pick the lunch place we're going to go to this week. That can be an act of self-esteem. Okay, ineffective communication, submissive communication, and aggressive communication. Submissive communication is giving into others, accommodating, pleasing others becomes more important than taking care of yourself. So we would please others at our own expense. So I might not like conflict so much that I would rather just do whatever you want in order to make that conflict go away. So it's similar to what we were talking about before. Aggressive communication is getting and saying what one wants at the expense of others, or using threatening or intimidating language to manipulate a person into complying to your wishes. So if I'm using manipulation or aggression to get people to comply to what I need, I am using aggressive communication. So aggressive communication isn't based on intimacy, neither is submissive communication. It's based on, aggressive communication is based on coercion, and submissive communication is based on pleasing. So most likely those are both fueled by a lower sense of self. Because when we feel worthy of who we are and what we have to offer, we don't need to accommodate, because we believe that our needs are as important as others. When we have a solid sense of self, we would not use aggressive communication, because we would never threaten somebody in order to get what we want. We would approach it with respect. So mutual respect would be, would not use aggressive communication, because aggressive communication is not respecting somebody, right? It's intimidating them. It's coercing them into doing what you want. So the antidote to all of this is a healthy sense of self, among other things, but a healthy sense of self is good. Okay, steps in assertive training. Understand what assertive communication is, what it looks like and sounds like, so that you can duplicate it. So you can take a class, or you can see a therapist for a little bit. Assertive training it's a layered thing that we start looking at, but it usually, the underlying thing is usually worth or anxiety. That's usually the fuel behind it. And also fear, but that could, fear and anxiety could go together. But anyway, okay, monitor your assertive communication. Notice which situations are easier for you to act assertively and which are more difficult. And you want to try to make the situations that are easy, like notice those consciously. So try to do them more often. Oh, look at that. Look at how assertive I am, because it's like a practice ground. So you try to do 3 or 4 assertive things at the beginning of the week. And then by Thursday, you're trying to do something that's more difficult. Observe people who are great at setting strong boundaries or assertive behavior, and watch them, model their behavior. Let them be your teacher. Practice assertive communication, and remember that the growth is gradual. So it takes time. We learn a little bit, and then we take a step back. We learn a little bit and we take a step back. But practicing assertive communication is the only way to get better. Adopt an assertive attitude. So when we develop a strong sense of self, we are more capable of saying, you know what, this is part of who I am, and I need to do this. I need to make sure I take care of myself in this way. We need to feel worthy of our needs to protect them. Okay. I'm going to show you this video. This is a 5-minute video, and Jordan Peterson is who did this video, but he does a lot of talks about assertiveness and integrating our light and dark. And part of this people pleasing is not integrating our light and dark. So let's look at what he has to say. I think it's interesting. It's like, if we're not allowed to be angry or criticize somebody, we may not, if that is a family rule in our unconscious mind, we may not be able to be assertive, because that would mean we would have to be critical of somebody. So we may have this unconscious rule that stops us from doing that. So anyway, as we integrate our psyche, we dive into some of those unconscious drives, and we start to unravel them. So once we make it conscious, then we can choose different. All right, let's watch.
The first thing you have to understand with regards to trying to come to terms with the conception of the shadow is to understand the idea of persona. And persona is the you that you present when you want people to accept and like you. Often like. Let's say that you go to a party and you're trying to impress the people that are there and you're trying to get them to like you. And so you maybe get jabbed at a little bit and you laugh and you go along with everyone so that they like you, and then you go home and you're bitterly resentful about the way that you were put down at this party. And that's going to make all sorts of aggressive, I wish I could have said, it's going to make all sorts of aggressive and vengeful thoughts sort of flash through your imagination. Well, the first part of the problem is that you were too much persona, right? You sacrificed yourself in some sense at the party so that people would like you. And in the second part, you're refusing to admit to the existence of those elements of you that would have actually protected you from doing that. So let's say you go home and you're all bitter and resentful and you have fantasies of revenge. I mean, that reveals to you the shadow part of you that's aggressive. And the thing is, you actually need that, because if you would have integrated that more successfully into your personality, when you went to the party, you wouldn't have had to let people put you down to get them to like you. Instead of having a face like this, which says, I'll take anything that's coming my way, you have a face and a stance that's more determined and assertive. And if you manifest that properly, people aren't going to mess with you to begin with. But you may have already adopted a morality that says, well, I have to be likable and I shouldn't do anything that causes any conflict and I shouldn't ever, hurt anybody's feelings. And so you're just to present yourself as a punching bag, and you think that that makes you a good person, but it doesn't. And there's no integration of the shadow in that situation. So you see that at the end of the movie, when I mentioned this, when Simba climbs up the rock to take control of it, all the female lionesses bare their teeth and he roars. It's like that aggressiveness is integrated into him. And so resentment is a really good emotion for making contact with the shadow side, because if you're resentful about something, it basically reveals two things. It either means that you're immature and you should stop whining and get on with things. Someone's asked, this often happens with adolescents who are asked, say, by their mother to clean up their room. They get all resentful about it. It's like, shut up and clean up your room. It's not that much to ask. So that can be a gateway into the observation of your own immaturity. Or it's possible that you're resentful because people really have been poking at you too much and taking cheap shots at you and oppressing you. But what that means is that you've got some things to say that you haven't been willing to say or don't know how to say, right? You can't stand up for yourself properly. And in order to do that, you have to grow some teeth and be willing to use them. And again, that's something that might violate your morality, because you might say, well, I shouldn't be able to bite people. And the thing is, yes, you should be able to bite people hard. And if you're able to bite them, then generally you don't have to. But they need to know that you can, because otherwise, especially people who are badly socialized, they'll just keep encroaching on you and encroaching on you and encroaching on you and encroaching on you until you put up a wall. Like someone who's really well put together won't do that, because they're sophisticated. But if you run into people who only have boundaries because other people impose them on them and you won't do it, you're going to be the bullied one in the office, for example. You're not going to get a raise. People aren't going to credit you with your own work. Other people are going to take credit for it. And you're going to go home angry because you're doing your best and you're trying to get along with everyone and nothing ever goes your way. Well, it's because you're a pushover. And you think that's good because you confuse harmlessness with morality. It's not right. Just because you can't do any damage doesn't mean you're moral. It just means you don't have the capability for mayhem. And that makes you a pushover. I mean, the Jungian stuff is very, very dark, It's very dark because his notion of what constitutes a moral human being is much different from the typical view. He really thinks you get that horrible side of yourself integrated so it's up there where you can use it. Because otherwise you're dangerous. You can't say no to people and you'll go along with the crowd. And then if the crowd does something particularly pathological, which it's liable to do, you won't be able to resist it. You won't have the strength of character. And so then you'll fall prey to crowd pathology. And it'll be because you're too agreeable with a shadow resentful side that the crowd and its murderous intent is going to act out.
Okay. Yeah, what do you think? I would like to have a discussion, but we're not in real life. So again, that's Jordan Peterson. I think the thing to take away from that is aggression needs to be in balance with agreeableness. If it's not in balance, the balance of aggression and agreeableness is where we find assertive. We can't be assertive if we're too aggressive or too agreeable. If we're too agreeable, that's where we become a pushover, like Peterson was saying. If we're too aggressive, that's where we become a bully. So again, as we integrate our psyche, we can hold both of those things. And that's where we find assertive. And that's also where we find compassion and empathy and tolerance and all of those things. Those things are all, it's the middle road. It's the balance of the two extremes where we find change. Okay, just a few more considerations. Okay, this week, if you're up for it, practice. This is just an example. Mom says, hey, haven't you done the dishes yet? Kind of in the aggravated way. And you say, hey, Mom, I can see how frustrated it is that I haven't done it's frustrating for you that I haven't done the dishes yet. I have an assignment due in an hour and I plan on getting them done after that. Does it work for you? So maybe you take some ideas that we've talked about this today and try to implement them this week. Try to look at your assertiveness. Look at where you fall on that spectrum between aggressive and agreeable. And if you do tend to be more of a pushover, look at that. How can I build a stronger sense of self? What can I do? And remember, all that stronger sense of self is also the thing that makes us less susceptible to all of those cognitive distortions. And as Peterson was saying, that kind of group think, that societal movement that happens where we may not agree with it. We become less susceptible for that. We become more courageous, more willing to take a stand. Okay, that's all for today. So I will see you next week.